You are an Auschwitz survivor.
Correct, yes. And even more, I was liberated 75 years ago,
Yes.
which really saved my life.
That moment, Eva, of liberation, put it into some kind of context for people who may be too young to really understand what the Holocaust was about.
Well, you know, this was an enormous area of concentration camps, well, Auschwitz, but women camp was Birkenau, and there were tens of thousands of people in inhuman conditions, without food, without clothing, in the winter, with illnesses, with lice, no toilets, no drinking water, in the hot summer, in the big snow, and you slept in a big bunk with 8 people.
Anne Frank's name is synonymous with the haunting diary that offered a deeply personal account of life in hiding during the Holocaust. Her words have transcended generations, shaping the way history remembers those lost in one of humanity's darkest chapters. Yet another voice from that same history has remained largely silent until now. Eva Schloss, Anne Frank's posthumous stepsister, endured the horrors of Auschwitz and survived, carrying with her memories that remained unspoken for decades. Now, after 80 years, she's chosen to break her silence, offering a first-hand account of survival, loss, and the truths left unspoken. Life before the war.
How do you find that strength?
Well, for me, actually, it was when I was arrested just on my 15th birthday. I didn't want to die, you know. Who wants to die when he's young? We had a beautiful life in Vienna, and I wanted to get married, I wanted to have a family, and so I never ever gave up. But nevertheless, like I say, miracles,
Yes.
that without miracles I wouldn't be here. You know, little things which just saved your life in some kind of ways.
Before the war shattered their worlds, Eva Schloss and Anne Frank shared a childhood in Amsterdam. Born Eva Geringer in Vienna in 1929, she and her family fled Austria following the Nazi annexation in 1938, seeking refuge in Belgium before finally settling in the Netherlands. The Geringers lived in the same Amsterdam apartment block as the Franks, and Eva, who was just a month younger than Anne, became acquainted with her as a casual playmate. Their childhood was marked by the ordinary joys and struggles of growing up, but the shadow of rising anti-Semitism loomed over their daily lives. As the Nazi threat intensified, Jewish families across Europe scrambled to find safety. The Geringers, like the Franks, initially believed that the Netherlands would provide security from the horrors unfolding in Germany. However, this sense of safety was short-lived. The German invasion of the Netherlands in 1940 shattered any hope of refuge, as the Nazis swiftly imposed their anti-Jewish laws. Daily life became increasingly restricted. Jewish children were expelled from schools, businesses were shut down, and families were forced into ghettos. The sense of normalcy Eva had once known vanished entirely. The reality of Nazi rule quickly escalated into a climate of terror. The streets were no longer safe for Jewish families, as Gestapo raids and arrests became common. Jewish residents were required to wear the Yellow Star of David, further isolating them from their non-Jewish neighbors. Fear and suspicion crept into every aspect of daily life, as betrayal could come from any direction. Even close friends and neighbors, desperate to protect themselves, could turn informant. In 1942, both the Franks and the Geringers were forced into hiding, attempting to escape the ever-tightening grip of Nazi persecution. Unlike the Franks, whose hiding place in a secret annex became the setting of Anne's famous diary, the Geringers found refuge elsewhere, relying on the kindness of the Dutch underground. Their hiding experience was fraught with danger and uncertainty. Constantly moving from one location to another, Eva and her family lived in fear of betrayal, knowing that even a single slip could result in their discovery. For nearly 2 years, the Geringers evaded capture, but the stress of secrecy took its toll. The family endured long periods of isolation, unable to step outside, speak loudly, or risk exposure. Simple tasks like obtaining food and supplies became logistical nightmares that relied on an intricate network of allies. They listened to radio broadcasts in secret, hoping for news of the war's progress, but each passing month brought only more despair. But in May 1944, their luck ran out. A Dutch informant betrayed them, leading to their arrest by the Nazis. Eva, her parents, and her older brother Heinz were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the brutal death camp that would claim the lives of over 1 million people. The Franks, too, would be discovered and sent to concentration camps, where Anne and her sister Margot would perish. Eva's connection to Anne, once rooted in childhood proximity, would later be solidified by tragedy and survival. The Nightmare of Auschwitz.
Well, my mother was actually, perhaps it was October, we had no idea.
Yes.
She selected by Mengele to be gassed. We had to parade naked in front of him, and if he thought you're too thin, you can't work anymore, you went to the wrong side. And I thought I had lost her, but again, through a miracle, she was not lost.
Well, what was extraordinary was, as you say, you believed that your mother had been selected to go to the gas chamber.
Well, she was selected, definitely.
Yes, you thought that she was going to die.
Arriving at Auschwitz was a descent into a world devoid of humanity. Eva, just 15 years old, was wrenched away from her father and brother as the Nazi guards barked orders, forcing terrified prisoners into different lines. That was the last time she ever saw them. The separation was not immediate death, but it was the first cruel cut of many to come. As Eva and her mother were pushed towards the women's section, she turned back one last time, trying to hold on to the faces of her father and brother in her memory, knowing she might never see them again. The conditions in Auschwitz were beyond comprehension. The stench of death filled the air, and the sound of suffering echoed through the barracks. Prisoners were cramped into overcrowded wooden bunks, stacked in tiers, each small space shared by multiple people. Sleep was rare and unrestful, as the night often brought the horror of waking up next to a cold, lifeless body. Malnutrition and disease swept through the camp like a second executioner, weakening even the strongest prisoners. Lice crawled on their scalps, dysentery left them barely able to stand, and the relentless hunger gnawed at their bodies like a living thing. Every day was a battle against death, with prisoners subjected to brutal forced labor and inhumane treatment. Work meant hours of backbreaking toil under the watchful eyes of armed guards who did not hesitate to beat or shoot anyone who fell behind. If the Nazis deemed a prisoner too weak, they were sent to the gas chambers. The ever-present threat of selection was a psychological torture in itself, as the slightest sign of weakness could mean instant death. Eva and her mother clung to one another, drawing strength from their bond, knowing that being separated could mean the end. One of Eva's most haunting memories was the day her mother was selected for the gas chambers. Prisoners were ordered to strip naked and stand in a line as Dr. Joseph Mengele, the infamous angel of death, surveyed them like cattle, deciding who was fit to work and who was not. Mengele's casual flick of the wrist sealed fates in an instant. Eva watched in horror as her mother was directed towards what she believed to be certain death. By some miracle, her mother was spared at the last moment, but the trauma of that moment left a scar that would never fade. Liberation.
And you were liberated, and today is the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz.
Yeah.
That moment for you, what was that like?
Well, it wasn't, it wasn't the end of it, because the war was still going on, and we didn't really know what were the Russians going to do. They were not having a holiday, they were fighting. So when the first ones came, they just fed us, but went on again. So, and, some people thought, well, they were going to just leave us there, or perhaps taking us to Siberia. Well, we had no idea.
On January 27, 1945, the Soviet Red Army arrived at Auschwitz, liberating the remaining prisoners. For Eva and her mother, liberation did not bring immediate joy, but rather exhaustion, uncertainty, and the grim reality of what had been lost. The once mighty Nazi empire was crumbling, but in its wake, it had left devastation beyond comprehension. As the Soviet soldiers entered the camp, they found skeletal survivors barely able to move, their hollow eyes filled with a mix of relief and fear. The first days of freedom were filled with confusion. The Soviets provided food and medical assistance, but many survivors were too weak to eat. Their bodies, ravaged by starvation, could not immediately process nourishment. The psychological scars ran just as deep. Many, including Eva, struggled to believe they were truly free, half expecting the Nazis to return any moment. For Eva and Fritzi, the journey home was long and arduous. They were placed on crowded trains with other survivors, many of whom were sick or dying. The trip was a painful reminder of the horrors of deportation, though this time they were traveling towards life rather than towards death. Upon arriving back in Amsterdam, the city they once called home, they were met with an unsettling reality. Home was no longer home. The Jewish community had been decimated, friends and neighbors were gone, and anti-Semitic sentiments had not magically disappeared with the defeat of the Nazis. The reunion with Otto Frank, the only surviving member of Anne Frank's family, was bittersweet. While they found solace in shared grief, the weight of their collective losses was unbearable. Otto, who had spent years hoping for Anne's return, now faced the painful confirmation that she was never coming home. Eva and her mother, though relieved to have each other, knew their family would never be whole again. In time, Otto Frank and Fritzi found solace in each other's company, and in 1953, they married. This marriage bound Eva and Anne's memories even closer together, solidifying a connection that neither of them had chosen, but both had endured. It was in this post-war period that Eva began to slowly emerge from silence, recognizing that her story also needed to be told. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you think of Eva Schloss's decision to speak out after all these years? Let us know in the comments section below.